please welcome Holly Kuzmich, Senior Vice President of the George W. Bush Presidential Center.
Good afternoon, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Bush Center. We're delighted to co-host this special event featuring His Excellency Lobsang Sangay, Prime Minister of the Central Tibetan Administration. You'll meet Mr. Prime Minister in just a minute. As you know, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has a very special relationship with President Bush, and we welcomed here in partnership with SMU and the World Affairs Council last July. We miss His Holiness's joyful laugh in Dallas, and we wish him all good health. His Holiness speaks eloquently about his commitment to democracy, a commitment we share and continue to work on through our work here at the Bush Institute. He lived out that commitment when he retired as a political leader and transferred his authority to a democratically elected position. Mr. Prime Minister, we admire the continued dedication of the Tibetan people to democracy and human freedom, and we wish peace and prosperity to everyone there. I want to recognize our friend Kedor Okatsang, who is here, representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the Americas. Thank you, Kedor. Good to see you again. And I also want to thank our co-sponsors for this event today, the Crow Collection of Asian Art, the Tower Center for Political Studies at SMU, and the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. And with that, let me welcome Jim Falk, who is the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Holly. It's always a pleasure for us to be here, and indeed, as Holly said, I want to echo her sentiments. We're very pleased to be working with the Crow Collection and the SMU and the John Tower, and you know, this really has been a unique opportunity for all of us. Think back just a few months ago, we welcomed His Holiness here to Dallas. The weather was about the same, just a little bit warmer, but the sun was shining, so it's a good omen. You know, if Lobsang Sangay had been born in the United States, and as he has done, and become a Harvard-educated lawyer and political leader, we would describe him as having lived the American dream. But as you'll learn this afternoon, this dream is not finished. He was born in India to Tibetan refugees who left their homeland as a result of the Chinese invasion in 1950. The Dalai Lama fled to India in 1959, and as we know, created the Central Administration for Tibetans who lived outside the nation. One of the things that I enjoyed learning about our honored guest is it's great to know that you can get a degree in English literature and get a job, because we hear so much about STEM education. But indeed, as many of you know, I used to work at the Institute of International Education, and it gives me great joy to see that Dr. Sangay was a Fulbright scholar and obtained his master's degree at Harvard Law School. Indeed, he is the first Tibetan, and to the best of my knowledge, the only Tibetan to still have received a law degree at Harvard. Throughout his academic and political career, he has really been devoted to human rights. In fact, one of his papers was Tibet, Human Rights and the Rule of Law. He was also a student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And then, as he entered and worked in his political work, he sought to promote Track 2 diplomacy and organized a number of conferences focusing on the issue of Tibet with scholars and politicians from around the world. He's received numerous recognitions and awards, but one that I think all of you would take a great interest in, that in 2007, he was selected as one of 24 young leaders of Asia by the Asia Society. Now, as you know, the Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibet, and we welcomed him in July. And when he was here, he talked about the need and desire to achieve happy humanity. And of course, we should probably point out that the Dalai Lama's optimistic thoughts were expressed before he'd seen the US presidential candidates and their Happy Humanity campaign. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please now join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of the Central Tibetan Authority, whose ambition is to improve the lives of the long-suffering people of Tibet. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim, for the kind introduction, and Holly for being so kind. And I would like to thank the Bush Institute, the Crow Collection of Art, and also World Affairs Council here in Dallas for hosting me, inviting me. It's a great honor and privilege. President Bush was a very good friend of Tibetan people, as well as His Holiness Dalai Lama. Recently, he was describing me meeting with all the presidents of America, and he always said, with President Bush, he got along from the day one. With other presidents, it took them a couple of meetings to warm up, but by the time they get warm up, the term of the president was always over, So with President Bush, they said, so sometimes in India, or when he's in the presence of all the monks and holy people, religious people, he always says, President Bush is a good friend of mine. They all look at him amazed, why is he saying that? He says, no, he is a good person, So you might disagree with him on some policy matters, but he is a good person, so I like him. So it's a great privilege to be here in Texas also, because whenever I'm asked, some of you might know, asked to talk about Tibet, I always say Tibet is as big as California and Texas combined. It's that big. So today, finally, I'm in the land of Texas. Now I can actually say, I went to California, I went to Texas, I actually saw the size. Yes, Tibet is as big as Texas and California combined. So it is really true. Tibet is as big as Western Europe. It's 2.5 million square kilometers of land. That's huge, but not that much oil, so. But as per Chinese government, Tibet has oil and 123 different kinds of minerals, copper, gold, borax. Hence, the exploitation of minerals are going on. And also, when you look at the photographs of Tibet, normally they show dry Tibet, but the south and east part of Tibet is also very green, pristine forest. So the question why China invaded Tibet and occupied Tibet till now is partly because of the natural resources. That's why the term Tibet in Chinese is Xizang, means Western treasure. So Tibet has lots of natural resources. In addition to that, Tibet is also the source of major rivers of Asia. Now, environmentally speaking, Jim, I'll come to the political part. Jim wanted me to go straight to political aspect of Tibet. I'll come to that. But environmentally, also, after Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve of ice. But the difference being that Antarctica and Arctic, when the ice of Antarctica and Arctic melt, it goes to ocean. But as far as Tibetan glaciers is concerned, when they melt, it forms fresh water, turns into river. Hence, the major rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. As far as many environmentalists, 1.4 billion people are directly affected or benefit because of Tibetan rivers. Now, according to some environmentalists, they stretch a bit and say directly or indirectly, 40% of the world population are affected by the rivers that originate in Tibet. Now, it's easy to count 40% because you're talking about Asia. You have to combine China and India. That's almost 40%. Then you bring Bangladesh and Pakistan and Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Burma. That's right there. Now, how it is so? For example, the Indus River and Satluj River starts from Tibet, goes through Ladakh, Kashmir to Pakistan. Brahmaputra River, the lifeline of Northeast, especially the state of Assam and Bangladesh, starts from Tibet, goes through all the way down. And Mekong River, Salween River, Irrawaddy River, all starts from Tibet, goes through, we all have heard of the Mekong River, the famous Mekong Delta, starts from Tibet, goes to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. And Yellow River and Yangtze River, Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, starts from Tibet. So you can clearly see why Tibet is important as far as water resources are concerned, because nowadays, some scientists have also concluded that before the wars were fought over land, nowadays wars are fought over oil. That's why you see a lot of crisis in the Middle East. Soon wars will be fought over water. If that happens, Tibet is the source of major rivers for whole of Asia. Now, there is an impending crisis. China has 19% of the world population, but only 12% of fresh water. Now, remaining 7%, which is equivalent of 400 million Chinese people, are facing water scarcity, especially in north and northeast of China. Now, what would Chinese government do when 400 million people are facing water scarcity? What would they do? Would they divert all the Tibetan rivers towards China or not? If they divert, what will happen to Indus and Satluj River, which is the lifeline for Kashmir and Pakistan, Brahmaputra River, which is a lifeline for Bangladesh and northeast of India, especially Assam, and Salween, Mekong, and Irrawaddy River, which is a lifeline for all the Southeast Asian countries. So this is a major issue. Now, problem is, what you see now, in China, there's a fresh water crisis. In India, it's worse. Bangladesh is worse. Pakistan is worse. Now it's going to get worse because, much worse, 50% of Tibetan glaciers have already disappeared in the last 100 years. According to NASA, another 50% will disappear by 2050. Actually, 82% will disappear by 2100. Now, what will happen if that happens? And also, the glaciers over Tibet is melting very fast because of the globalization, global warming, industrialization, urbanization. So Tibet that way is very delicate as a region, as an area. And we talk about the rainforests of Brazil. Actually, the second rainforest, so to speak, is in the Himalayan region, and Tibet is on the top of it. So that's what Tibet is called, the roof of the world. So environmentally, Tibet is vital. So recent heat wave in Europe, some Chinese environmentalists conclude, has direct relationship with Tibet, warming up of Tibet. And the recent heat wave in northeast of China has also direct connection with warming up of Tibet. So environmental Tibet is vital. Now, geopolitically also, Tibet is becoming very important because Tibet was the buffer zone between India and China. After the occupation of Tibet, now Chinese army have moved into Tibet. Now, China and India are facing face-to-face. It has never happened before. Now, the two of the largest populated countries in the world are facing each other. Hence, there's a huge military buildup, 2,000 or so kilometers long border. And then arms race is going on in Asia. According to former CIA director, the biggest arms race is going on in Asia. Now, when you have two of the largest countries facing each other, and then what you see in recent years with China, with its aggressive policies towards its neighbors, from South China and the East China Sea to Indonesia, you name it, and incursion in Indian borders and all the neighboring countries. So anything can trigger. Hence, the military buildup on the Tibetan plateau is huge. China has already 6 military airfields. They're building more. The railway track that they have brought from China to Tibet, they're stretching it to Sikkim, which is India, to Nepal, and they are trying to take it all the way to Burma. They already have what they call weather-tested friendship with Pakistan. They have built a seaport. They're building one more in Sri Lanka. They're trying to build, they have already completed in Sri Lanka. They're trying to build one in Burma. So as you can see, India is surrounded that way. So recent election in Nepal has brought a China-leaning government. So it's complicating the whole relationship in that part of the region because the buffer zone, the Tibet, was removed. Now all these countries are facing each other. Now that's why recently, actually, in India, there are, I think, 9 or 10 books are coming out, written by experts on India-China relationship. And they're devoting either a chapter or major portion of the book describing the importance of Tibet, which was not the case 10 years ago. So there is a growing realization, even in India, about Tibet from geopolitical point of view, environmental point of view, from water resources point of view. Now, politically or historically, Tibet was an independent country. We can go way back to a treaty signed between India and Tibet and China in 721-23, which clearly said Tibetans are happy in the land of Tibet, Chinese are happy in the great land of China, signed by Chinese representative and the representative of the Tibetan king. So that treaty exists today in the form of stone pillar in the capital city of Tibet called Lhasa. So even the Chinese government recognized Tibet as an independent country in that treaty. Not just that, when China signed, during those days, when China signed a treaty with all the neighboring countries, they always described the relationship between China and the neighboring country as between sun and the moon, which is fine, but often between father and son. If you look at the treaty with Vietnam, they said father and son. With Korea, they said father and son. Tibet was quite powerful at that time. They said, no, not between father and son. If you say that, it amounts to or indicates ownership. They said it should be between uncle and nephew. So nephew could be more powerful than uncle, you know. So at that time, because the Tibetan army invaded China, went all the way to its capital, Chang'an, now it's called Xi'an, and in fact removed the emperor of China at that time and imposed his own puppet emperor for a month. But the summer was coming, so the army retreated to Tibet. But then Buddhism came to Tibet. This is, I'm talking 7th, 8th century. Then Buddhism was introduced from India, and then quote-unquote pacification of Tibet happened. From a major military empire which extended all the way to Central Asia, all the way to Ganga River in India, to China, Tibet as a territory restricted itself to the Tibetan plateau. And also the pacification happened. It turned into a Buddhist country. And then actually when Chinese army came to Tibet, invaded Tibet in 1950s, we didn't have army equivalent to a police force of Texas. Less than 10,000, maybe. So it was very difficult to defend against a well-trained, military-tested Chinese army coming from China. So that's how we were overrun, and then we lost our country. But why Tibet is relevant? People always say, I'm in the land of Texas. You say, oh, you're all several thousand kilometers or miles away, so why should people in Texas care? In fact, I was giving a talk in University of Mysore in South India. 2 African students raised their hands and asked me the same question. Can you tell us something about the Chinese investment in our countries? And I said, yes. Did they build good roads? They said, yes. Did they build good entertainment center? They said, yes. Did they co-opted your elite? Yes. How did you know about my country? Now, this is how exactly happened in Tibet. So they are following the same template now all over the world. When Chinese army first came to Tibet, when Chinese came to Tibet, our parents and grandparents used to sing a song. Chinese are like our parents. When they come, they shower with you silver coins. Actually, Tibetans were paid silver coins to build roads, good roads. Once the roads were complete, same person changed from the most polite, humble, who Tibetans could bully, into a bully himself or herself. Once the roads were completed, tanks rolled in, trucks rolled in. Then it started exploiting natural resources. So even two of the African students told me, no, the Chinese built good roads. I said, yes, exactly. It has to last till your coal and the minerals last. So in that sense, it's relevant because unless you know the Tibetan narrative, you will not understand China. What you read in the glossy papers of the business section of newspapers or in TV advertisement is one China, which is all true, economically booming, so it's contributing to lift Chinese from poverty, which is all true. But if you know the Tibetan narrative, you know what China is capable of. What China is capable of are as follows. After the invasion, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. 99.999% of monks and nuns were disrobed, sent to prison, sent to farms. They were simply chased away. Many died of starvation and shot dead as well. Buddhist scriptures were burned, thrown to rivers, and the statues, very precious one, gold, silver, everything were put in trucks and taken to China. They melted, and in 1970s, early 80s, after the Cultural Revolution, there was some opening when the Tibetan scholars and experts went looking for the treasures that was looted and burned. They could find only 25% at most. 75% is gone forever. So you can clearly see, up to 1 million Tibetans have died directly or indirectly after the invasion. So these things you don't hear normally. So unless you know the Tibetan narrative, you don't understand China, what China is capable of. So hence there's a growing realization in India and the neighboring countries, they all want to know what happened to Tibet because they don't want to be next. That's what they say in Hong Kong. We don't want to be Tibet. Taiwan also said the same thing. We don't want to be like Tibet. So this is the Tibetan narrative, which is very important. And also, historically speaking, I'll conclude with this, Tibet is part of the great game in that part of the world, Central Asia. Afghanistan, Xinjiang, Tibet, Mongolia were part of the great game for the major powers of that era. The British, the Russians, the Chinese were all trying to control that area. Now what you see is Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia, half of Mongolia went to China, other half, Outer Mongolia, went to Soviet Union, and Afghanistan. Still, what you see in Afghanistan now is the troubling history of that time, the great game, still continues in Afghanistan. So Tibet was occupied. Now after the Soviet Union broke up, Outer Mongolia now is an independent country. So what you see now, the great game is still being played out in that part of the area. And Tibet still is the center of that area, one of the central issues, given the geopolitical reality, given the importance of environment, given the spiritual nature of Tibetan civilization and political aspect of Tibet. Tibet is relevant. And especially if you want to understand China, you have to know Tibet. So I hope you will agree or disagree with me. Those who disagree with me, please be prepared with your questions in a Texas way, straightforward. And I will answer you in a Tibetan way. very nonviolent, polite way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we begin our conversation, I do want to remind everyone that the Bush Center has kindly comped our parking, so there's validation outside as you leave. Thank you very much for your remarks, and I think it really sets in the context a much better understanding. One of the things that I wanted to get a better handle on is, what is the population now of the Tibet and the diaspora? Where are they located primarily?
Tibetan population is altogether 6 million. And then diaspora population is 150,000. So, but they're scattered all over the world in 40-some countries. I'm in the middle of re-election now. So when I got invited here at Ashish's insistence and the Bush Center and World Council, I said, why not? I will come, and I agreed. I didn't know it will fall in the middle of my election. So now I'm in the middle of my election, and I'm right here in Texas, near Dallas, and I don't see any Tibetan voters in the crowd. So
there got to be 2 or 3 out there.
I hope so, yes. So I wonder my visit to Texas does not turn into any vote, you know. But nonetheless, Bush Institute and Bush Center is very prestigious, and President Bush is a good friend of Tibetan people, His Holiness Dalai Lama. So I said, I will fulfill my commitment. I'll lose my election, but fulfill my commitment.
What devotion? When is the election?
Actually, March 20th.
And tell us, who is your opponent? How many opponents are there? And
actually, in the first round, October, we have 5 declared candidates. Now, our democracy is partyless democracy. The theory being that party works only for its party's interests, not for national interests. So hence, it's partyless democracy. So anybody can stand, anybody can vote in the first round. So then we screen, the election commission decides the final 2 or 3 candidates.
how do you handle non-residents? Can people vote who are residents in the United States?
Yes, anyone. We have the Tibetan associations in all over, in 30-some states in the US, the pockets of Tibetans. Each of the local association acts like an election commission, and people vote, they tally the votes, and then send it to our representative office, and there they do the formal counting, and the results are sent to Dharamsala, the headquarters. And our election commission is very strict. Unless you vote on the specific day, your votes are invalid. And not just that. In fact, our voting policy is reversed of American War of Independence, you see. When American fought for independence, they told British, no taxation without representation, the Boston Tea Party. Yeah. Ours is no representation without taxation. So you have to pay your freedom tax to vote. So when you go to polling booth, you have to show that you have paid your freedom tax. Then only you get to vote. So it's reverse. But majority pay their dues and vote.
That sounds maybe even now a little bit simpler than what we're going through.
No comments.
No comments.
I don't want to tilt the votes to one candidate or the other. Yes. No, I was in Japan actually a few weeks ago.
We are at the Bush Institute. So.
I think so, yes. I was in Japan a few weeks ago, and then I was talking to a senior member of parliament who was a former minister, and then he said he's going to America, and we were just talking about election. He said, America does not stop surprising the world.
Let me ask you this. Your remarks actually were a pretty strong tone regarding China's intentions, and yet we looked at the video about the middle way. And so it seemed to me that you were sort of moving away from that to some degree. I felt that, you're pretty harsh in some ways about what China's doing now.
Yes, and the Tibet is under occupation. There is political repression. For example, if you are, if 2 or 3 Tibetans even come out in the streets of any town and say a few slogans, anything, religious freedom or environmental rights, anything, they arrest you, they put you to prison for a long time. They torture you. Cultural assimilation, Tibetan language as the medium of instruction is not allowed, right? In high school, middle school, only in primary school, mainly because primary schools are in the rural nomadic areas where Chinese teachers cannot go. Environmental destruction I already shared, and social discrimination. For example, in the capital city of Tibet, Lhasa, there are signs, sometimes openly, sometimes hidden, but practice is, it says, if you are Chinese, we pay you 50 renminbi a day. If you are Tibetan, we pay you 30 renminbi a day. So how would you feel in Dallas or Washington, D.C., signs saying, if you are American, we pay you $30 a day. If you are Chinese, we pay you $50 a day. I mean, signboard.
So I understand that. So how do you feel now about how you're going to get to the point that you're trying to strive for?
Yeah, having said that, you know, we have to be realistic, given our history, and even though U.S. government, you know, has been very supportive, President Bush has also issued statements of support for Tibetan people. The Obama administration has also supported publicly, stated that they support the middle way policy. And there's a Tibet Policy Act as well, which was drafted and adopted during the Bush Senior. So in that sense, American government has at least at humanitarian, at least symbolically and publicly supported the issue of Tibet. But we are dealing with China, so we have to be realistic. So what we are seeking is genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws. So middle way policy, which is also a Buddhist concept, middle way is devoid of two extremes. Now, which is, what we say is the present repression should end. If repression ends, we will not seek separation from China, but we will simply seek genuine autonomy as per Chinese laws. So in that sense, that's a very reasonable ask. What we are saying is, if the Chinese government implement their own laws for the Tibetan people, which is already drafted and declared, we will take that as autonomy.
Now, you working
not
through the United Nations on this, but obviously China has a veto.
Yes, China is there in the Security Council, so we can't do much in the United Nations. But in 1959, 61, 65, 3 resolutions were passed by the United Nations General Assembly, one asking for self-determination of the Tibetan people. But General Assembly is simply an advisory board. Security Council makes the call. And China is right there saying no.
You know, when the Dalai Lama was here last summer, and he's said this on numerous occasions, that there might not be another Dalai Lama. How does that affect the work that you're trying to do when there is perhaps a question about the spiritual leader?
Now, His Holiness Dalai Lama, you know, he is a Buddhist monk. You know, he, from his very young age, he has practiced dialectic form of debate, you see. So you get answers what you ask. So when he was asked, can you be the last Dalai Lama? He says, yes. And then the next question is often, can the next Dalai Lama be a woman? Yes, he says. And the headlines of newspaper is also, I am the last Dalai Lama. Next Dalai Lama will be woman. But if you ask him, can you say the next Dalai Lama will be a Texan? He will say yes.
And he does that laugh of his as well.
Yes, then he always laughs. Because that's a dialectic form of debate. You know, you're asking a specific question, and theoretically it's possible next Dalai Lama could be woman or a Texan or the last Dalai Lama, which is all in the realm of possibilities, because they'll say, if you ask him, why are you saying this? Oh, Buddhist notion of impermanence. There's no beginning, there's no end, or there's end to everything. So Dalai Lama has to end one day. Dalai Lama can be woman, American, Texan, things like that, right? But he always answers with one important sentence. But it is for the Tibetan people to decide. So whether this Dalai Lama is last Dalai Lama or not, it's for the Tibetan people to decide. So he's the 14th Dalai Lama. So we have had 13 Dalai Lamas before. He's the 14th. If you want to have 15th, it's for the Tibetan people to decide. Or if you want to end in 14th, which will not happen, it's for the Tibetan people to decide. So theoretically, it's possible next Dalai Lama can be a woman, but practically unlikely.
Or Texas in this audience.
Or Texas in the audience, yes. In the great state of Texas, he'll be born with a cowboy hat and all that, yeah.
Well, we don't have to end yet, but we will in a little bit, so I want to be sure that we get questions from the audience. It's a little hard for us to see, but we do have a handheld mic, so if you'd raise your hand, and Alana and perhaps someone else will take the microphone to you.
Yeah, you can read it. Here you go. When you're talking about the middle way, how do you think that China would be able to give you the land of Tibet back? I could understand possibly the culture.
Hence, middle way is not geographic specific. Its focus is more on administrative regulations or administrative autonomy. So if Tibet is granted genuine autonomy, we are not saying we'll put up a wall or a border between China and Tibet. But what we're saying is administratively, Tibetans should govern itself so that our culture, our language, our custom, our traditional values, our environment can be preserved and protected by us. So that's more administrative autonomy. It's less of a geographic in nature. Pardon?
They would then keep the land.
Yes, because China will have a sovereignty over whole of China. That includes the territory of Tibet. But administratively, we will run the region ourselves.
Other questions and comments? Yes, right over there. And could I see others so that Alana will know where to go? Go ahead, sir.
Hi. And you say there's a lot of dispute between China and neighbor, with an aggressive action in history. What do you think about the future of South China Sea dispute at the moment?
Can't say. You don't know what will happen. But you know, if you the Chinese word for China is Tunguo, which means the Middle Kingdom, which means China is the center of the universe. The rest are all extension. So by that definition, China is the civilized world, and rest are barbarians. So China is the civilized world. Tibetans, as neighbors, were barbarians. So we have to be civilized. Hence, the official narrative is that Tibetans were peacefully liberated from the backwardness, and the Chinese civilization has made Tibetans more civilized. Now, by that definition, because center of the universe, Tibetans are barbarians. By extension, India, South China Sea, East China Sea, all the way to America, sorry, Texans, we all are barbarians. So by that extension, we all have to be civilized by the center of the universe, Tunguo, that's China. So hence, that's why I said Tibet narrative's importance. What happened to us could happen to anyone.
You know, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Dharamshala, and so I wanted to ask you, how you've talked about the taxes, but how else are you funded? You receive assistance, I assume, from India and other countries, but give us a better sense of that.
Tibetan administration is 600 full-time employees and 900 additional employees. So it's 1,500 employees, administration. It runs like a full-fledged government, actually. We run our own schools, 42 or so school, primary to high school. And we have like 40-some hospitals, just few hospitals and clinics mainly. And then we have like 42 or 3 Tibetan settlements, colonies all over India, Nepal, and a few in Bhutan. And we have 12 offices of Tibet around the world, semi-embassies, one in DC, and Kedola is our representative there. But we have 265 monasteries and nunneries, so number of monasteries and nunneries are high compared to our schools and hospitals, mainly because thousands of Tibetans flee from Tibet, come to India for spiritual and religious education. So we send them to monasteries. That's where we have a large number of monasteries. So we oversee all these things. But our budget is only about $25 million. So this is the most frugally run international movement ever. So whenever I see someone from American Embassy in Delhi, I always say, I run my administration, it's the international movement with all the schools, hospitals, with far less than your budget for an embassy, So if you want to run things efficiently and effectively, all the corporate leaders around, hire me as a consultant. I'll give you and the first advice I'll give you is cut your salary. I spent 16 years in America, in the People's Republic of Cambridge, and I had a job at Harvard. Now my salary is $400 a month. It's a labor of love, yes. So I don't think any CEO will hire me now, because first thing I'm going to tell them.
No, I think they will hire you now. Think of that, a Harvard-educated attorney for $400 a month? You can't beat
that's
it.
cheap, yeah.
I think I saw another question up there, didn't I? Yes. If you'll wait for a microphone. Is it coming? Alana?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I was looking at someone else. Go ahead, sir.
Dr. Lobsang, before the arrival of Buddhism in Tibet, Tibet was a very violent place. And with the arrival of Buddhism, it began to change and became one of the most peaceful, unified countries in the world. Can you speak a little bit about the effort and energy as far as spiritual means go to recuperate Tibet as opposed to political means?
I can't say Tibet was a violent place, but it was a military empire at that time. So we did have a religion, indigenous religion called Pön, which is similar to shamanistic kind of religion, you see, which worships mountains, rivers, and spirit, and things like that. We still have a large number of population who follows Pön tradition as well in Tibet today. After the introduction of Buddhism, which came mainly from North India, from the Nalanda tradition, from the Nalanda University, and the Nalanda scholars, 18 of them are regarded very highly, to Tibet, and Buddhism prevailed, and the Tibet turned into a more peaceful, inward-looking, both geographically, but also as a human. You start looking inside. And then we have continued the tradition. I can't say there was no violence. Of course, we all are human beings, So there were elements of violence, obviously. But now, even now, our freedom struggle is based on nonviolence. Gandhian notion of ahimsa, Martin Luther King. So we are following nonviolence. And in some ways, you don't get traction or support or attention because you are nonviolent. If you look at IS in Middle East, when you resort to violence, you get attention, and then to counter that, you roll out your tanks and military and things like that. But our model of struggle is we adopt nonviolence because nonviolence as a process, procedurally also as a process, it's nonviolent. And when you achieve your goal, still nonviolent. Hence, what you have is a peaceful place. So our effort is nonviolence, despite the fact that we are Tibetans are repressed and their environment is exploited. We stick to Buddhist notion of ahimsa. So that's what we practice. But because we feel after we gain our genuine autonomy, we want to rebuild our community and society, and relationship with China also will be much easier because nonviolence has been the process, and the result will be nonviolence.
I think I saw.
I do see some Tibetans here, yes.
Voters.
But as per Election Commission rule, I can't ask for votes.
And in the rules of the World Affairs Council and the Bush Institute, too. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
First of all, I really want to thank you. Your lecture was phenomenal, amazing. With a limited budget of $25 million, it's still a lot of money. Where do you generate those revenues from?
Now, Tibetans, you have to pay Green Book dues. That's part of the contribution. And Tibetans
And
also,
how much are those? Or what you, how does that work?
up to 10% maybe.
Okay.
Rest of the 90% we have to collect it, raise it from individuals, organizations, through philanthropic organizations, things like that. And then US government is a major contributor also on humanitarian projects though. They don't contribute to political.
How much does the United States give?
Till recently, $3 million.
And you said until recently. What does that
Now it has increased. Yes, so it has doubled. We've almost tripled now from next year on. We have a line item budget for Tibetan communities in India and Nepal. So that's very, again, from our point of view, that's very courageous to put in the line item in the budget. That's a declared budget, for. So recently, the U.S. State Department held a meeting of, the officers from different embassies in Delhi. So they were told that, look, Tibet is politically sensitive for many countries, so we can't do much politically because it all depends on China to enter into dialogue and resolve the issue of Tibet. But on humanitarian basis, you should do something. So that was a nice pitch from an American official. And then the question from the other embassies were, so do you do it publicly? He said, yes, it's a line item in the budget, So that way, I think US government has been a good example. So despite all the things India has done, for Tibetans, India has done the most by far. There's no comparison because the largest number of Tibetans are in India. Tibetan administration is based in India. Most importantly, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been in India and hosted by India for this many centuries, for this many decades, I'm sorry. But after India, America has been out there in the forefront, speaking about Tibet publicly and funding that way. And the European countries also contribute on humanitarian projects for hospitals and schools, things like that, yes.
About how many Tibetan students in higher education are in the United States now?
From India or altogether?
Altogether.
Altogether, a few hundreds, yes. Because we do have around 20,000 or so Tibetans in India, in the US now. They are fully settled here. So maybe a few hundreds in the universities.
I think I saw another question. Go ahead.
Thank you for being here, first of all. My question, we were in Lhasa in 2001, and the question arose there that the Chinese were confiscating any donations made to the temples everywhere. They went around, picked up the money at night, and took it home, which leads to the question, Islamism going to be compatible with communism?
Yeah, I think two maybe slightly different issues, but it's true. At present, in urban areas like Lhasa and Shigatse, Chamdo, these are the towns, there are more Chinese than Tibetans in summer. Mainly because there's a lot of tourists, Chinese tourists coming, anywhere from 12 to 13 to 14 million Chinese tourists come to Tibet. And also 75–80% of the businesses in Lhasa, the urban areas, are owned or run by Chinese. Hotels, the restaurants, the shops, and everything. So that way they control the economy. Now, as far as, having said that, during winter at this time, Tibet is Tibetan majority. Tibet is Tibetan majority in rural areas. But even urban areas, Tibet is Tibetan majority because very cold. It's 4,000 meters high average. And then so cold, the Chinese go back to their villages and towns during winter. So that's why we are not a big fan of global warming. We want the world to remain cold for a long time so that we can survive. But also for Chinese to settle in Tibet is very difficult Because there was some scientists who have done this research and found the mortality rate of Chinese giving birth in Tibet is very high. So they go back home to give birth, and after 3-4 years, they come back. Even if it's intermarriages, mortality rate is very high. Also because, it's been only 3,000 or so years ago, Tibetans found barley. Up to 3,000 meters, wheat will grow. And then above that, wheat does not survive the cold winter, especially ice and snow. But barley can survive. So it's only 3,000 years ago the Tibetans moved from 3,000 meters to 4,000 meters high after discovering barley. So genetically, it takes 500 years to survive in that climate. So China will take 500 years to adapt themselves to Tibet, as long as global warming also stays. So Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore.
Well, that may be your closing comment, but I do want to give Your Excellency, would you like to make any closing comments as we close the program?
Thank you very much to Jim and Holly and every one of you for coming on Saturday evening instead of going and enjoying the weather. I came from minus 16 degrees from DC, which reminded me of Tibet. Then coming here was a pleasant trip. So, Friday afternoon is normally a precious time for you all, but to spare your time means a lot to me, mainly because you might think, I just came, showed up, I want to see what he has to say about. But for us Tibetans, especially back home in Tibet, they will read tomorrow. They will say, when Sikyong went to the Buddhist Institute, how many people turn up? Every one of you count. They will say, hey, there are friends around the world, including in Texas, who care about Tibet, who care about justice, who care about human rights, who care about democracy. So every one of you, your presence is a message of solidarity and support to 6 million Tibetans who are looking and trying to hear a good news from the rest of the world. So that way, I want to really express my sincere gratitude. And also, as I said, our movement is nonviolent in nature. Our success will happen for sure. That's why I left America, my job at Harvard, and the People's Republic of Cambridge, and Starbucks coffee for Indian chai, because I want to be nearer Tibet when that happens. And it will happen very soon. When that happens, it will be partly because you people coming and showing support for the Tibetan people. When it happens, it will be the success of justice. It will be the success of freedom. It will be the success of liberty. And one more time, we will write in world history, justice prevailed, nonviolence prevailed. And that will be the best stories of the 21st century. Thank you.
Now, before everyone leaves, and I want to say, I think we just heard a very good campaign speech. We know why you're Prime Minister. I'd like to invite Amy Hofflin, who is the director of the Crow Collection of Asian Art, who has a few words.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again. Good afternoon. What a wonderful lesson today in compromise and compassion and hope. Thank you, Prime Minister. And thank you to Jim Falk. Thank you to our friends here at the Bush Center. Thank you to Holly and Amanda for welcoming us back. Tibet might be closed to travelers right now because of the holiday, but Texas is open. You are always welcome here and very honored to celebrate your visit. So as you know, the Crow Collection of Asian Art is a free museum in the Dallas Arts District, and I'm here to tell you a short story that leads to a very special presentation that is reserved for prime ministers and Dalai Lamas. So 18 years ago, almost 18 years ago, we opened our doors, and just a couple of months later, I met the printmaking instructor at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. So Tibet has had a home in Dallas at the museum and at the school for over 15 years. And an important collaboration was forged through art, through a study of a very important history and culture, and through a museum that preserves Tibetan art even today. So we started working, and the initial project was to make prayer flags. The students of Booker T formed the Tibet Club, and the printmaking students made prayer flags, and each year when the Tibetan monks come to the Crow Collection of Asian Art for their week-long residency. This year it's in April. The students end the mandala with a consecration of the mandala, and they present prayer flags to the monks. As a museum educator, as an art educator, it is the most perfect art exchange I've ever experienced. And many of you have been with us in the galleries when it happens. It's completely beautiful. It celebrates the gifts and lessons of the human spirit. It inspires me that young people care about these messages that are in the prayer flags. And so they really do think about the words. They study the Tibetan language, and they think about the words that they want to incorporate into the graphic design of the linoleum and woodblock prints. And then they print them onto the prayer flags, and you can find them dappled across the arts district in unexpected spaces. So tonight, this afternoon, we have invited the students from the Tibet Club at Booker T. Washington, represented by their instructor, M.T. Davignon, who now carries on this love of Tibet. And so we would like to present you, Prime Minister, with some flags, original works of art. And I'd like to welcome Lizette Ayala, Natalie Lasko, the president of the Tibet Club, Miss June Rule, and Azra Zuniga. And they will come forward and present Sikyong with prayer flags. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, this is a prayer flag? I think we should show it to the, yes. I think one of you has to go that way, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, really appreciate it.
This work with Tibet has now inspired a movement for compassion. And so I'm calling on the Tibet Club and many leaders here in the city to help us follow the Dalai Lama's request that we create a city of compassion. So we hope that all of you here will be part of that in the years to come. So we are beginning a multi-year study on compassion. You can see Tibet in Tibetan book covers from the McLean Collection. It's north of Chicago, a very important collection of Tibetan art that opens on April 2nd. And please join us for our friends from the Drepung Losling Monastery. They visit us April 30th through May 7th. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you.